There are two further ideas. The first is, I just want to look at very quickly um, some of the basic challenges to autonomy that are existing in AI today. And then we will look even more briefly at the idea of control societies, which is a sort of theoretical idea. So, challenges to autonomy. Uh, the question is, how does artificial intelligence challenge human freedom? We've said that it gives us a lot of freedom by showing us jobs that we could not have access previously, very good jobs for us, by giving us ideas about our health that we could not have accessed previously, by giving us choices about our insurance. But in some ways, AI does play a more restrictive role. And one of those rules is this idea of nudges. Um, Now, a nudge is an idea that was popularized in the early 2000s. It was not about artificial intelligence. It's just the idea that people can be controlled in some sense with incentives that are not monetary. Right? That doesn't count, and which are not some kind of force. They're controlled psychologically, let's say, with suggestions. And here's a classic example of a nudge, right? If you put stairs next to an elevator, almost no one will take the stairs. Almost everyone will take the elevator. But if you paint onto the stairs, as you see here, this idea that by taking the stairs, you will burn some calories and lose a little bit of weight, then all of a sudden, people will start taking the stairs. Another place where you see nudges is in supermarkets. They put chocolates and things near the checkout because you've done the job of doing the shopping. Now you get to reward, so you buy your chocolate. Um, these are just ways that stores play upon the way psychologically our minds work. So this field is the idea of nudges emerged in a field called behavioral economics, and why that's relevant for us is that behavioral economics goes on steroids with artificial intelligence. It sets nudges into overdrive. Um, Here is an example. Uh, People who have looked to get charitable donations, organizations like this organization here, the American Heart Association, which is a good and noble organization. It does charitable work to investigate heart disease, talking a lot about heart disease today. Um, and they depend upon donations from people like you and I. Now, of course, there's a lot of competition for donations, charities, and one nudging tool that has been discovered is that people who have had some loss recently in their family because of a heart disease or problem, they are more likely to to provide donations than those who have not. So what the American Association started to do is they started to find lists of people who had died from a heart attack and then call family members after some amount of time and ask for donations. Now, of course, what AI can do is it can find many, many more correspondences, right? Maybe it's not just if a family member has died recently, it could also be a friend. And maybe by studying the patterns of donations, artificial intelligence could also find that if you call someone only a few days after a family member has died, then people are not ready to donate and they say no. But if you call someone more than a month after someone has died, then they've lost that desire to act against the disease and they again say no. So by statistical analysis, you can find what is the best time to ask for this kind of donation. Uh, and then you can just, with your own imagination, you can imagine many other kinds of correspondences that, with enough data, artificial intelligence could generate and could help target the American Heart Association. Now, what's being proposed here is not just that data will be gathered to target who should be called and when, but it will also be gathered to form what kind of appeal is made to a donor. That is what you say to someone who might give money. And even perhaps now, we could have an avatar do this request for us, right? The entire process could be automated. We could just make an artificial intelligence, give it access to the world's information, could look in the newspaper to see who has died and why, could find their relatives and so on. And autonomously, the AI could form a profile of people who might be good donors, like family members of the person who has died, could form a good sales pitch by appealing to those people. Maybe if they're highly religious, the appeal could be made in religious terms. Maybe if they are highly scientific, the appeal could be made in scientific terms. And there's different ways that an appeal for a donation could be made. And all these things, again, could be automated. Now, the question is, well, certainly this is a nudge, right? I mean, you are being targeted. If you receive one of these calls, you are being targeted at a certain moment and in a certain way by AI because of data it has accumulated about you. And you're more likely to give. That's true. But you're not being forced to give. So the question is, or even stronger, we could say, look, you're just being given the opportunity to give. So you can make the case, look, if you receive one of these calls, your autonomy, your freedom has gone up because now you have more options, not less. There's more you can do, not less than you can do. Right? You can make this donation and do something, take a stand against this disease, which has caused trouble for your family member. So that's the positive side. Autonomy goes up. But at what point does this kind of nudging become manipulation? At what point are you being taken advantage of? Where's the threshold? When does giving someone an opportunity turn into opportunism, turn into the attempt to manipulate someone to give a charitable donation that they might not otherwise give? And when it's that second case, it seems like the tool is taking away from human freedom and autonomy. But the question is, where is the line? And then I'm adding another question on top here. Does the whole issue about human autonomy change if these nudges are for a good purpose? That is, I mean, if the reason we are doing these nudges is to solve the heart disease problem, and it's a good organization that does it, are the rules different for human freedom than they would be if it was a real scam just trying to get money from you for nothing? I'm not sure. But I know that this question of nudging and human autonomy will be increasingly important as time goes on. In this kind of effective or emotional AI course, we know above all that machines and AI are becoming more powerful in terms of their ability to decode human experience and respond to it. Now, those responses, in the case of nudges, can be nudging. They can give us opportunities, they can increase our freedom, but they can be manipulative. Where's the line? And then how do we instantiate? If we can draw the line, how do we instantiate that line? Do we say things like companies that use these tools can only have access to certain kinds of data? Or do we say that they can only ask you to make decisions about a certain amount of money? Do those things protect your autonomy and your freedom? Or are those restrictions and regulations just more interference? Just more ways that we are taking away from human autonomy and freedom? It's not clear, but the question of nudging and emotion AI and human autonomy will be increasingly important as time goes forward. Now, there are other kinds of nudges that seem to be more exploitive, right? Like this. This is a case. These are called dark patterns. Is frequently the way these are referred to. A dark pattern is any kind of nudge where really they're just trying to take advantage and manipulate the consumer. So here, in this case, you could buy sneakers, and then you are given the option to buy insurance for the shoes. I'm not sure why you would want to buy insurance for the shoes, but I am sure that by making that option the dark green option, you're more likely to hit it, right? Um, so something like that it's a nudge, but it seems like it's a manipulation too. It seems like it's trying to get you to spend money for something you really don't need. And so we sometimes when we talk in those terms, we call that a dark pattern, as opposed to a nudge. A dark pattern is a nudge, which is just manipulation. And then finally, the last topic to cover on the question of dark patterns and nudges, it is important to understand that there is a biological reality to this. This is something Facebook discovered way back at the start. They discovered that um, when people get a like on a post, they literally get a kind of dopamine release in their brain. Now, dopamine is a pleasure subchemical in the brain. It's associated with cocaine and heroin, and also with some other human activities that very pleasurable kinds of things. So you get a little shot of this pleasure every time that you get a like on Facebook. And it didn't take Facebook long to figure out how they could control their users. That is, every time they sensed from their algorithmic studies that someone was about to leave the platform, what would they do? Well, they would make sure, do whatever was necessary to make sure that they got some likes, some thumbs up on the person's post to try to keep them on site, try to keep them engaged. Now, here again, of course, it's true that at any time, anyone who is using Facebook can close the laptop, close the laptop, turn off the computer. Facebook is an autonomy opportunity. Absolutely. It lets you do all kinds of things, good things, great things that you could not do before. The possibilities that people have because of Facebook, the freedom they have gained is almost immeasurable. But it's also true that the same thing which gives us this freedom, all it takes it away to some extent through this dopamine effect and through this kind of this chemical nudging. And so you have the question, look, this is not just a nudge, this is almost like being a drug dealer. Facebook has drug dealer in this case. And then there too, we have the question of human autonomy and freedom. In fact, almost the entire debate that we're having about autonomy and AI could be repeated underneath the question of drug dealer and autonomy, right? On the one hand, the person voluntarily goes to the drug dealer, but on the other hand, they become addicted. So they get freedom, but then they lose freedom too. Staying on the question of Facebook, while it's true, I think that AI can be kind of like a drug dealer. Well, I think in the case of Facebook, it is a kind of a drug dealer. Right? It dispatches dopamine with likes. Um, Still, in the case of this kind of tool like Facebook, it's undeniable, as I've said, the kind of freedom and opportunities that the site allows. So it's very difficult um, to have a negative judgment about these kinds of sites. But there's a lot of work to be done to try to think about how these kinds of tools can be re-engineered to optimize for human autonomy and freedom. Then the kind of question you ask is, well, what does this mean, let's say, in terms of profits? How much, if any, profit are we willing to give up in order to gain more human autonomy on the site? Or is it the case that by making changes, by making sort of decreasing the nudging factor, the addiction factor, and concentrating more on the opportunities, is it the case that the profits could go up? Could it be that maximizing autonomy also maximizes profit? Maybe this is a kind of engineering challenge for the future. In any case, we have closed off now the main points I wanted to make in the area of autonomy. There is one point left, but let me first summarize what we have done, and then we will close with the final idea. First, what we have done is we've tried to get a sense of what the human experience of freedom is. What does it feel like to have autonomy? And there we had the idea of the locked room. where you could do whatever you wanted, but you were locked inside. Are you free or not free? And how does your experience change when you find out that you are locked inside, even though you can still do whatever you want? And then we try to get a sense of what that experience is, that change, when we use the LinkedIn experiment, the thought experiment. And we said, you make the choice. You can go into this LinkedIn machine and get the perfect job for you, but you can't try anything else. The entire idea there was to try to get a sense of what freedom feels like from the human perspective. Then we moved on to talk about the definition of human freedom. We said that there was Aristotle's idea that freedom is giving rules to yourself. Autonomy is, on the one side, not being constrained by others, and on the other side, not being just random and chaotic. And then we said the third definition of human freedom was this idea of, well, and then we said the second, sorry, jumped over. The second definition of human freedom was this idea of I can do whatever I want up until the point where what I do causes trouble for other people. And that was the example from Locke and drinking. And then the third example was this case freedom on a practical level means that you are not constrained, that you have informational freedom and psychological freedom, meaning that you kind of know what's going on around you and your brain is more or less ordered. So that was the definition of human autonomy or freedom. And then we looked at how that definition works in the real world, in real cases of effective AI, or at least human experience AI. In the case of Cardiccio in the heart monitor, in the case of dynamic insurance. Then we moved on to challenges to autonomy, and we talked about nudges and dark patterns. And now, to conclude, I would like to make one final point. These two people you see on the far left and the far right, that's Gilles Deleuze and Michel Foucault. They are experts in philosophy. And one of the interesting subjects that they wrote upon in the 1980s was something called a control society. Um, a control society is one where there are no prohibitions. They tried to imagine a world in which nothing was prohibited, but nevertheless there was governance. And the way governance worked was by essentially what we now today call nudges, and by the operationalization of those nudges through large amounts of data. That is, we never tell people that they can't do something. We just use large amounts of information about people to direct them toward what we want them to do by appealing to who they are. So it was a kind of a science fiction experiment that they wrote on, but it gives an idea, sort of a larger picture of what is at stake in questions of human autonomy and AI. Just as AI can, as we've seen, create tremendous and does create tremendous human potential in the area of autonomy, so too we can imagine that there is an underside of control or nudging, which detracts from that kind of freedom. And so the task of engineering now, from an ethical point of view, is to try to, and from an autonomous point of view of autonomy, to try to find a way to engineer our tools so that they maximize the autonomous side of our existence. Okay, that's enough for this section.